If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 30. At first, after hearing Frieren's account, Flam felt a little uneasy, but she wasn't too worried about what might happen. However, for some reason, Ash didn't return the next day. This wasn't completely unusual. Sometimes things came up. Though he might get injured, he always came back unharmed in the end. After all, with Ash's strength, there really wasn't much to worry about. But as the third day passed, then the fourth, and even a month, 2 months. They began to think he had suddenly left without saying goodbye. But when they went back to Serie, they realized he hadn't returned there at all. At Flam's request, the Emperor sent out search parties, but nothing was found. The Empire even investigated everyone named Ash in the country, but no one matched the description. There was no news of him at any of the Empire's checkpoints either. It was as if Ash had evaporated from the face of the earth, vanishing without a trace, leaving no sign of his existence. And just like that, 50 years passed in the blink of an eye. Flam fulfilled her dream, and then died of old age. According to her will, Frieren returned to the unchanged underground ruins, carrying her final note. The world around her continued to change, but this palace filled with books, and the elf girl on the throne, seemed frozen in time, a corner forgotten by the world, quietly watching history unfold, yet remaining completely unchanged from the first time she had seen it. Even Serie, sitting on her throne, looked no different than before. Frieren, I thought it was Ash, Serie remarked, still half reclined on her throne, looking down at the familiar figure below with a hint of sarcasm. If I'm not mistaken, you hate me. Why have you come here alone? Honestly, I thought we'd never see each other again. Ash is probably dead. Even if he survived, he likely died of old age, like the teacher. Dead? I see. Frieren's news of both deaths caused Serie to pause for a moment, but then she smiled. It's been half a century since you last came here. No news of him at all? So, he's dead, is he? Aren't you sad? Frieren asked, her expression blank as she stood at the bottom of the stairs. I only took them on as disciples on a whim, Serie replied, waving her hand dismissively, making Frieren's note float into the air. Without even looking at it, she asked, but for you, weren't they the closest people to you? Aren't you sad that both of them are gone? Am I sad? I don't know, Frieren sighed, feeling hollow as she lowered her head in sorrow and murmured softly, when I think about it, there's still so much I don't understand about both the teacher and Ash. But if I had agreed to go with him that day, maybe he wouldn't have disappeared so suddenly. What, are you crying? I don't know. I just feel empty inside, Frieren whispered. I've been thinking about it for the past 50 years, over and over. She hadn't shed tears when she buried Flam. She just couldn't understand why the people around her were crying. But now, Serie's words made her heart surge with inexplicable emotions, and her eyes became warm. But just as tears flowed down her cheeks for the first time in her life, Serie, sitting on the throne with one hand on her chin and looking at the suicide note, suddenly said, although normally Ash should be dead, my intuition tells me that he is still alive. Still, alive. You know what? My instinct. Then do you know where he is? I don't know, it's just intuition, not divination. Don't you know all kinds of magic? Why can't you tell fortunes? I told you last time that kind of convenient magic is monopolized by that goddess. Even if you know it, it won't be effective. Serie seemed quite unhappy as she brought this up. But Frieren was completely confused. Can something like that also be monopolized? Just think of it as a huge barrier that covers the entire planet. It'll be easier to understand that way. Just as? What exactly is it? How would I know exactly? If I knew, I would be a god. For some reason, she was called the magician closest to God. However, as for the true realm of God, she had been standing still for thousands of years. Precisely because her strength had stagnated, she spent a lot of time learning various magic and skills. This also included the technique of hiding one's breath, which she herself thought was very impractical, and some strange legendary magic that was very convenient but couldn't be used in combat. It could only clean clothes or produce a floral scent. Is what Serie said true? Even though there was no evidence, that intuitive answer alone was enough for Frieren. Because Serie's intuition was almost indistinguishable from magic and was very worthy of recognition, just knowing that Ash was not dead greatly reduced the regret and remorse in her heart. The heavy stone that had been weighing on her heart finally fell, allowing her to leave the ruins and finally sleep in peace after half a century. However, she didn't know whether Ash had died of old age or what. After that, no matter how much time passed, whether it was 100 years, 200 years, or even 300 years, she never met that figure again. Perhaps, after his master's death, he had quietly returned to that distant, unknown hometown and peacefully completed his life's journey amid the laughter of his descendants. Sure, that's right. With a glimmer of hope in her heart, as well as a faint sadness and nostalgia that couldn't be concealed, Frieren couldn't help but pray like this. Chapter 31. On the snowy plain where they had come from, Ash couldn't help but feel that something had changed. He wasn't sure if he was misremembering, but as he returned to this time and place, the snowfield seemed different from before. Was it because the war was still ongoing? He couldn't be sure. However, when he was sent back, despite having a rough understanding of the current situation, he didn't feel overly panicked. In fact, he felt a bit relieved. According to what Serie had told him, the goddess must have set up something to prevent others from traveling through time and space before leaving, perhaps a massive barrier covering the entire planet, meant to stop anyone from tampering with history. The system created by the Demon King in the mythological era allowed him to bypass these restrictions temporarily by simulating miracles, but now he had been sent back. However, the changes in his surroundings made him suspect that the deportation time had been slightly off. The system has detected that the blockade has intensified. The next time you attempt to go back to the past, it may trigger an alarm and result in unpredictable risks. Please proceed with caution to avoid further dangers. This rare system prompt made him realize that his method of cheating the barrier had been banned. It was no longer available to him, leaving him with a sense of regret. At the same time, another thought crossed his mind. So, Flam is dead now. He stood quietly on the vast snowfield, looking at the familiar yet distant snowy landscape. The realization that he hadn't had the chance to express his gratitude, nor even properly talk to Flam about things other than magic, filled him with a deep sense of sadness. Life is full of uncertainty. It's true, 8 or 9 out of 10 things never go as we wish, even though I'm no longer human, he whispered to himself. His last words were tinged with a hint of self-mockery. There was also a trace of bitterness, drifting in the cold wind like snowflakes, eventually disappearing into the endless snowfield just like his figure, fading away into the snowy expanse. Ash used to visit the town beneath the snowfield frequently. It was, after all, built by him. But now, the town had completely changed. Everything from the past was gone, and the once familiar streets seemed to have undergone numerous renovations. This made him realize that a significant amount of time had passed since they had last set out. Still, he considered himself lucky when he came across a biography of Flam in a bookstore. The book, still popular in this era, vividly recounted Flam's story and even mentioned that she had an elf disciple and a human junior fellow apprentice by her side. History has indeed changed, but even reading it now only deepens my meaningless sorrow. In the illustrations, Flam still appeared as she had when he knew her. He lingered on the image for a few more seconds, sighed, and then placed the book back on the shelf. Of course, there were no portraits of Frieren or himself after all, they hadn't played a significant role in the transformation of humanity. Yet from this latest edition of the book, he could tell that nearly 1,000 years had passed since that time. The vast time span made everything feel surreal, and Ash couldn't help but worry that Orem might be dead. Though demons, like elves, have no natural lifespan limit, they are still bound by the rule of the Demon King, who constantly drives them toward war. Many demons disobey the Demon King, and if they can hide successfully, they may survive. But if they're caught or disobey his orders openly, they will be killed. Even those who escape into the forest are at risk of being discovered and surrounded by humans. Demons living for hundreds of years are exceedingly rare, and Aura's magic studies, still immature, had limited effects. This left Ash deeply worried. Though Aura had her own hidden motives, she was still the sister he'd grown up with, sharing raw meat in their struggle to survive. He couldn't shake his concern for her well-being. But for now, all I can do is hope she survives, he muttered to himself. After wandering through the city and seeing the current level of magic, Ash's emotions were a complex mix. The magic of this era paled in comparison, not only to the legendary magic from Serie's mythological time but even to the magic of Flam from thousands of years ago. Even the technology from back then had become lost knowledge, further emphasizing the backwardness of this era. Ash had finally obtained the complete magic system he had long desired, more advanced than anything this world had, but the price he paid was the disappearance of his only remaining family. Not only that, his first human friend, Kathy, who had once been his adjutant, was now long gone, and it was unclear if her descendants still survived. Even after all this time, he couldn't be sure if Frieren and Serie had survived. Both were skilled magicians, but in a world full of dangers, even the most powerful could die. Hundreds of years could change far too many things. The street he recognized was one of the few remaining connections to his past. It had rough stone roads, worn smooth by the passage of time, with low wooden houses lining each side. Every so often, a dim oil lamp flickered in the wind, casting long, wavering shadows. Though this street wasn't as bustling as more modern places, it still held life. Vendors continued to sell their goods, knights rode by on their horses, and pedestrians either chatted with one another or hurried along, each focused on their own business. In the midst of all this, Ash felt like an outsider. He walked alone on the stone road, feeling as though he were a traveler from another time entirely. The vibrant life around him seemed more like distant, vague background noise. A cool breeze swept through the narrow streets, carrying dust and fallen leaves, as though it was pulling some of the warmth from his heart. His eyes wandered over the faces of passers-by, but no one caught his attention, and no one paid any attention to him. Everyone around him seemed to be moving forward, lost in their own world, too preoccupied to notice this solitary traveler. That was until a man, with long bangs and a slightly scruffy beard that made him look oddly older than he was, suddenly blocked Ash's path. In the middle of the crowded street, this young man, with two long swords hanging from his waist, locked his gaze on Ash. He stared for a long moment before breaking into a smile, as if remembering something. "I almost forgot. This is our first meeting, right? So let's get introductions out of the way. My name is Frank, and soon enough, I'll be the strongest man in the world. Honestly, I've been waiting for you for quite some time now, Mr. Ash, or rather, future Demon King." Chapter 32. As Ash walked toward Frank, he immediately sensed an intense feeling of danger from the young man. Even Frieren wasn't as strong as him. Perhaps Flam, who had been almost 50 years old when Ash left, had the power to match him. So young, yet so powerful? Ash muttered to himself, but the other party said something strange with a smile, even directly pointing out his identity. Is this an attempt to exorcise evil and defend the way? Here? On the street? Even though he felt he was definitely no match for his opponent, Ash did not despair. Because he was not a pure magician, and his magic was very effective in both group battles and one-on-one combat. If a real fight broke out, the opponent would probably have to sacrifice the entire street and drag all the people nearby into hell. After all, even though he had gone back to the past, he didn't have an exceptionally long time to study. But for a demon, his growth had been quite impressive. Additionally, it's worth noting that the normal growth of magical power is accumulated over the years, but that only applies to demons and elves, not humans. For example, the human in front of him was obviously an extremely rare genius among humans. If Aura were still alive and had practiced for more than 400 years, she probably wouldn't have been able to use that special magic to control Frank, who was no more than 30 years old. And the same went for him. But the reason why his appearance hadn't changed and no flaws had been discovered, aside from Serie's guarantee, was largely due to his rapid progress. In terms of magic power accumulation, he was not like a demon or an elf, but more like a human, and a human with considerable talent. But obviously, his accumulation was still not enough. At least facing this young man, who was more talented than Flam, it would be difficult to escape from the scene except by resorting to underhanded tricks, and even then, it might not succeed. Although, if possible, he absolutely did not like to kill innocent people, whether human or demon. He had no desire to kill meaninglessly. And the other party didn't seem to be crazy enough to ignore the people on the street. For some reason, he didn't appear to harbor any malice. But once the young man revealed his identity as a demon, how could Ash not be on high alert? The hand under Ash's robe had instinctively gathered magic power. Compared to the turmoil in his heart, Frank seemed very calm. He seemed to notice Ash's vigilance, smiling wryly and raising his hands to show that he had no hostile intent. "No matter how many times we meet, you're always so cautious. But trust me, I am not your enemy. You're really good at talking. You're spouting nonsense on the street. If I had real hostility, I would have chosen a secluded place or left this town," Frank retorted, then gave up trying to persuade him from that angle and shifted the conversation. "As I recall, you built this town more than 400 years ago, correct? And now you've returned from the past nearly 1,000 years ago. How do you know this? Mind reading? No. I wasn't even thinking about that just now, so how do you know this? The strange remarks from the other party piqued Ash's curiosity. Who exactly was this person? After all, his current state was like being shot forward by a slingshot. The goddess's counterattack had accidentally sent him back in time by several hundred years before he ended up where he was now. So, more than 400 years later, he didn't believe anyone could recognize him or know so much about him. From Ash's perspective, this strange human was highly suspicious. His distrust seemed to trouble Frank as he sighed, "You may not believe me, but you told me yourself. I really don't believe it. No matter how many times, your vigilance is always this high. So, in exchange, how about I tell you one of my secrets?" "What?" "Come here first. Don't worry, you can keep your weapons. I know you don't kill people casually." As Frank spoke, he handed over the 2 swords at his waist. This move completely confused Ash. He took the 2 swords in a daze, but questions continued swirling in his mind. Still, after hesitating for a moment, he chose to trust his instincts and the other person temporarily. He followed Frank out of town, eventually arriving at a deserted road in the suburbs. Frank treated Ash like an old friend reuniting after a long time, his gaze filled with warmth. When Ash frowned in discomfort, Frank smiled and said, "To be honest, I have the magic to foresee the future. I can see the futures of others, including my own. I've used this magic countless times to peek ahead." "Is that so? Seems like we're on pretty good terms then." Ash, surprised but not entirely disbelieving, thought this might explain the situation. "By the way, I will become humanity's strongest hero of the South, and you will become the Demon King." "That's impressive. Did we work together?" "You could say that." "No. The hero and the Demon King working together? That's a new one. I've never heard such a story before. So what's your goal here? What do you want from me?" "I don't need anything, but you wouldn't believe me if I said that." Frank sat on the wooden fence by the roadside, gazing nostalgically at the nearby farmland. "If I didn't meet you now, we'd cross paths in about 15 years. That's when I'll truly begin my journey and become one of the many heroes." "And what about me?" "Originally, I intended to punish you for causing a worldwide sensation." "Me? What did I do? Did you succeed?" "I ended up being convinced by you." "Hey!" Ash couldn't help but feel confused. Why would I, as a demon, do something so sensational, and yet this hero, who was supposed to save the world, ends up being convinced by me? He wondered if he was really that good at talking his way out of things. From the moment they met until now, Frank had led the conversation, leaving Ash to question whether he was being deceived. Chapter 33. Frank saw Ash's confused expression and couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Haha! I knew you'd have that expression, but I wasn't lying to you. You're absolutely right. Stop speaking in riddles. Can't you just be direct?" Ash felt his patience was nearly gone. At this, Frank calmed down and began to explain slowly. "It's a long story. First of all, when you were a general of the human race, what you despised most was using children as cannon fodder, forcing them onto the battlefield. So, there were no children in your army, right? What's wrong with that? Is there a problem?" "I hate that practice, too." "Well, you are hero, after all, so that's understandable. But I'm just a hero. What's that supposed to mean? So, I can't change that." Frank, who had just been laughing, now clenched his hands unconsciously. His words were heavy with helpless sadness. "Even if we defeat the Demon King, or even if we eliminate all the demons, this situation won't change. As long as humans exist, human nations will continue using this method of warfare. At least in the future that I can see, it won't change. If anything, once the demon threat is gone, the internal conflicts among humans will become even more vicious, don't you think so?" "That's right, your judgment is quite accurate. Do I even need to say it? It's pretty obvious if you think about it." Compared to the humans he'd known before, Ash thought the humans in this world seemed more ruthless. At least in the ancient times he remembered, there hadn't been an era where most of the nations agreed, either directly or tacitly, to send their own children into battle as expendable fodder. But here, in this world, even in the southern nations, which weren't directly threatened by demons, children were often sent into internal wars with only basic equipment. They were treated as cannon fodder and tools for psychological warfare. It was so commonplace that it had become a staple tactic, not just against demons but even among humans themselves. This made Ash wonder if these humans were truly the same as those he once knew. Why would their leaders collectively adopt such foolish, inefficient, and heartless strategies? Did they not understand that children were the potential of the future? Or did they simply not care? Were the nobles and kings here so short-sighted and lacking in decency? Was this a form of societal decline? Still, he couldn't be overly concerned with the customs of the world's nations. Discussing the evils of the world while standing on a village road made him feel like he was back in modern times, talking about global issues next to a street vendor. It was surreal. The conversation had abruptly expanded to cover the entire world, leaving Ash's expression slightly uneasy. But Frank remained uncharacteristically serious. While Ash debated whether to redirect the discussion, Frank pressed on. The wars between humans won't cease just because we've defeated the demons. In fact, the conflict will only intensify until a single unified nation emerges. Only then will there be a temporary calm. Ha! Ash exhaled with a mix of fatigue and frustration. A hero can't raise his sword against his own kind, hey? After all, you're just a hero, not a king, so you can't change these things. Is that what you're getting at? That's exactly it. I can't change any of this. Even when it happens right in front of me, I can hardly intervene. This isn't the world I envisioned. But I'm just a hero. You, however, are different. At the end of his speech, Frank finally revealed his true purpose. He hoped Ash would become a restraining force over the nations. Frank wanted Ash to use violence as a deterrent, to prevent countries from sending children to their deaths. If possible, I would gather the demons in the northern countries, then gradually rule the world, becoming the co-ruler of both humans and demons. Only then could the world truly return to peace and finally break the cycle of tragedy. Yes, a tragic cycle. I don't know if this world is merely a game to the goddess. Every so often, a new demon king appears to threaten humanity with the destruction of the world, forcing new heroes to rise and save it over and over again. The holy sword, bestowed by the goddess, can sometimes be drawn by someone, and sometimes not, but the outcome never changes. There is always a threat of world destruction, and there is always someone who steps up to save it. But inevitably, there's always the next cycle of destruction and salvation, as if invisible rules govern both sides. Neither can truly destroy the other, but every so often, they will massacre one another. The reason he didn't choose humans was simple: Frank had no choice. He was a hero, and a hero would never kill humans. It's not just his identity that restricts him, his own morals wouldn't allow it. He couldn't support humans to become rulers, and human kingdoms wouldn't grant a hero any real authority either. At least, not in this world. Heroes here had no rights. At most, they received a bit of financial support and some freedom in their actions, but human laws would still bind them tightly. To Frank, Ash was a very unusual demon, nearly immortal, unbound by the restrictions of laws and morals, yet possessing a morality that most nobles did not. This realization solidified for Frank after he had seen firsthand the horrors of child soldiers at war. He knew he had to stop such atrocities at any cost and eradicate them from the world. After listening to Frank, Ash wasn't sure how to respond. It felt like the scope of their conversation had suddenly expanded far beyond what he'd expected. Even if you say that, how are you going to help me? You're going to become a hero, right? And you don't want to end up a criminal to humans, right? Exactly, so I can't help you in that regard. But what I can do is train you in a way that's best suited for you. But I know you have plenty of knowledge as a magician, and you already have a very powerful magic teacher, but you're still lacking when it comes to being a warrior. You even know that. At this point, Ash was no longer shocked, but rather starting to feel numb to Frank's knowledge. And I can see the future. That means I can tell you all the lessons you'll spend years figuring out on your own, as well as the shortcuts you haven't yet discovered. While I wish I could teach you to see the future too, it's not something that can be passed on just because I want to teach it. Otherwise, demons and humans alike would already be able to foresee the future. But I can still help you become the strongest magician and warrior in the world. You can really do that. Of course. As the future's strongest hero of the South, I can make this promise to you: join me, my friend. With those confident words, Frank suddenly stood up and extended his hand toward Ash, his heroism seeming far beyond his years. However, Ash stared at the hand, tilting his head slightly, lost in thought. He couldn't shake the feeling that the gap between this situation and what he had imagined was just too vast. Chapter 34. Facing Frank, who looked young yet was actually quite mature, Ash stared at his extended hand for a long time, suppressing the urge to voice his doubts. Though what Frank said was surprising and a little beyond Ash's current understanding, it left him feeling somewhat suspicious. Still, his intuition told him that this person wasn't the villain he had imagined, using deceit and trickery. This left him conflicted, but in the end, he accepted the decision even if he were being tricked and took the hand extended to him. Frank smiled boldly and immediately pulled him up from the wooden fence. Now, come home with me. Go home? Your home is nearby. No, my home is in the capital. Frank had come here purposely, having seen the future and knowing Ash would be here. But his words still made Ash feel strange. How could someone, after just shaking hands, invite him to their home so casually? Even though Ash believed Frank wasn't a bad person, the whole thing still felt odd. However, the conditions Frank offered were hard to refuse. After much hesitation, Ash decided to go along and check it out. Besides, he could eat and drink for free and see what Frank could teach him. Royal Capital, outskirts. In the unexpectedly large yet simple house, there were only 2 middle-aged maids. Frank seemed to have been a self-made businessman at 15, and his parents had died on the battlefield when he was still young. But thanks to his ability to predict the future, he lived a life that Ash found enviable. Yet the reality was a bit different. Although Frank once had a lover, for reasons unknown, they chose to break up early. From a very young age, Frank devoted himself to daily training. In what felt like an instant, Ash became Frank's apprentice in swordsmanship and settled down in the outskirts of the capital. Day after day, from dawn until dusk, from spring's bloom to winter's chill, Ash repeated his training without faltering. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, 13 years quietly passed. For demons, 13 years was but a fleeting moment, yet Ash's progress was unprecedented. But there was a problem. Since demons' internal structures differ from humans, they disintegrate into magical particles upon death. Although Ash originally resembled a human, his strength had reached the limits of his body, so when he fought at full power, his form would change. 2 devil-like horns would sprout from his forehead, and his entire body would enlarge, making him over 2 meters tall even without the horns. At the same time, his strength, agility, magic recovery speed, and control would all be greatly enhanced. Of course, this transformation marked his full demon state. It's also worth mentioning that in his human form, nothing changes, his appearance remains the same as before. But that only applies to him. 13 years is a different story for humans. Frank, once a young man, had turned into a middle-aged uncle in the blink of an eye. Though he still seemed full of energy, there was no escaping the change. It's so unfair. I've become an uncle in no time, but you look exactly the same as before. Frank stroked his beard, sighing as he looked at Ash, who still appeared as youthful as when they first met. But humans progress quickly, while demons advance slowly. Your progress, though, is nothing like the usual demons. If all demons were like you, humans would have been wiped out long ago. Frank sighed, a hint of envy and regret in his voice as he handed Ash a document. Looking closely, it turned out to be a property transfer document. More accurately, it resembled a will detailing the distribution of assets. What is this? Why is my name on it? If I die, the house will be yours. As for the rest of my property, please donate it to those in need. If. Ash couldn't help but feel uneasy hearing someone who could see the future say if. But Frank didn't explain. Instead, he packed his bags and, without looking back, said, "It's almost time for me to go. We'll meet in the middle of the continent 3 years from now. Have you heard of Fort Lanier?" "What are you suddenly talking about? I've been to Grobe village before." "That's right. There's a forest near there, isn't there?" "I think so. Well, over time, it changed from a village to a fortress." Frank sighed briefly, then added, "When you visit the forest, you'll find a surprise." "It won't be much of a surprise if I'm meeting an old man." "Haha, it's not me you'll be seeing. But, well, you'll find out then. Now, focus on controlling your demonic state. Since you can shift forms, your control is slipping. Even without seeing the future, I can tell you're a demon. There's not much I can do. Ash spread his hands in frustration. I've tried suppressing it, but ever since I transformed once, my demon aura has gotten much stronger. Just take your time. Frank didn't offer much advice, but smiled mysteriously, saying, someone will come tomorrow. You can listen to what he says, because we've already talked about it. Hey! You'll understand tomorrow. But for now, farewell. Goodbye, my friend. Frank left without further explanation, bags in hand, leaving Ash and 2 maids behind. Though the maids were from a nearby village, Ash wasn't thrilled about living with them. Yet that was not the end of it. The next morning, the 2 maids were gone, and Ash discovered Frank had fired them the day before. Ash was left speechless, planning to hire someone to take care of the house. But when he opened the door to the mansion, he found a male demon standing outside. Wearing a hood and mask, with long bangs covering his right eye and large horns, the demon had his arms crossed. The stranger sized Ash up before speaking slowly, "This is our first time meeting, right, Ash?" "Yes, or so it seems to me." As Ash recognized the figure, or rather, the demon, his emotions became suddenly complex. Chapter 35. Ash might not have known many other demons personally, but he had definitely heard of the one standing before him. This was no ordinary demon. He was the Demon King's confidant and the second in command of the demon clan, the great demon known as the omniscient Schlat. Like Frank, Schlat also had the ability to predict the future. Schlat was an impatient individual. Upon seeing Ash begin to understand the current situation, he spoke directly, as he was accustomed to dealing with people who could foresee the future. Nodding slightly, he said, "Next, I will teach you the future magic from 1,000 years ahead. Do you have any questions?" No, wait a minute. Frank actually has demon friends. No, he and I haven't met yet. We've just come to a tacit understanding on certain matters. Teaching you will benefit both humans and demons, so he and I have both decided to help you. Nominate me to be the Demon King? Aku. Though Ash said this, he didn't hold much hope in his heart. Schlat shook his head, his expression unchanged. "I will not betray the Demon King. It seems like they're training the next generation. That's a different matter. This is preparation for the death of the current Demon King." Preparation for the Demon King's death? Is that true? You people who can see the future, are all a little abnormal, aren't you? Ash couldn't help but feel a mix of envy and helplessness toward those who could see the future. He simply couldn't comprehend what was going on in their minds. Preparing a new Demon King in advance was unprecedented for demons. Normally, demons only cared about their own interests and didn't consider things like succession plans. The next Demon King was always someone who clawed their way to the top, through their own strength. "You'll understand in time," Schlat replied, closing his eyes as if to avoid further discussion. "But for now, you should accept me as your master." "Wait, shouldn't we at least negotiate some conditions first? Humans have a limited lifespan. Even if they avoid death, they can only see 100 years into the future, at most. But I can see what will happen 1,000 years from now. I've already seen your future actions. There's no need for you to worry. What will I be like in the future? If I tell you, it may cause new changes. Are you sure you want to know? Let's just forget it." Even though Schlat came off as a cold guy, Ash couldn't shake the strange feeling of talking to someone who could see the future. Especially when the other party made no attempt to hide the fact that they had seen the future and had probably had similar conversations with him before. Dealing with people who could predict his every move made Ash feel like his life was being planned out for him, as if by powerful parents. It was unsettling. But he understood why these two had chosen him. If his life could proceed without any major hurdles, he wouldn't have any complaints. Well, maybe a few complaints. For instance, if someone else were to be reborn, they'd likely be surrounded by a harem of beautiful companions in their teens. After decades of hard work, they'd either be fighting or training with them. But since Ash's rebirth, the people around him were all strange, either lowly-like, or older women, super old elves, or uncles. The closest girls to him had been the concubines in the emperor's harem nearly 1,000 years ago, and they were wives, not exactly decent girls he could relate to. Thinking about this made him want to beat his chest and stomp his feet in frustration. Schlat, noticing his mood, merely glanced at him before walking ahead. "Stop thinking about weird things and move along." "Hey? Wait, can you read my thoughts?" I can't, but I know you better than you know yourself. Whatever it is, it's probably something trivial. Where are we going? To the training ground you used to visit. There, I'll teach you killing magic, and later, a more advanced defensive magic that will evolve 600 years from now. Of course, these come from the demons, and only we can wield them perfectly. Schlat made no effort to hide anything and directly explained that the killing magic he would teach came from the corrupt sage Qual of the great demon clan. It was simple, efficient, and practical, which was why humans eventually cracked it, imitated it, and finally adapted it into their own form of magic, turning it into ordinary attack magic. However, the difference in the bodies of demons and humans meant that demons' magic was inherently stronger. The ordinary attack magic humans used couldn't compare to the demons' killing magic. The gap was purely due to their physical differences. Still, none of this was a problem for Ash. Schlat only had one condition: he was not to teach this magic to anyone else. The reason behind this condition wasn't entirely clear. Perhaps Schlat feared that his vision of the future would be disrupted, or maybe he had other concerns. Either way, Ash didn't care too much and agreed. Thus, the following days became a repeat of their usual routine, not much different from the past. Ash wasn't sure exactly when he had turned into such an ascetic. Compared to Frank, Schlat seemed colder, yet he was incredibly serious when it came to teaching. Aside from their magic lessons, there was little to no conversation between them. They didn't even eat together, as Schlat, always wearing his mask, would find a secluded spot to eat alone. Are all demons like this? I don't know, this guy feels so strange. Apart from Aura, whom he had raised, this was his first time communicating with a demon in such a personal way, and he found it hard to understand Schlat's behavior. And just like that, 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Ash had planned his route in advance and arrived at the agreed-upon place, Grobe Forest, at the scheduled time. However, shortly after reaching his destination, Schlat, who had accompanied him the whole way, disappeared without a trace. He left without any words of farewell. This guy, no matter how you look at it, is just too cold. Even though Schlat had always been distant, they had spent 3 years together, and Ash couldn't help but feel a bit of regret at such an abrupt parting. But his sadness only lasted a moment. He stepped into the forest, not expecting much, prepared to encounter another grumpy elder. However, an unexpectedly familiar figure appeared before his eyes. An elf, clad in a grey cloak over a simple white dress, with long silver hair, was crouched down lazily in the bushes, picking something. When the elf noticed his gaze, she turned her head instinctively. Upon seeing him, she froze in place as if she had seen a ghost. Chapter 36. No matter how Ash looked at it, the person picking wild vegetables in the bushes across from him was unmistakably his old friend and niece Frieren, the silver-haired elf he thought he'd never see again. The reunion after 1,000 years, along with the utterly bewildered expression on Frieren's face when she saw him, made him smile knowingly. As the elder uncle, Ash felt it was his duty to be understanding, especially since Frieren might burst into tears any second. He spread his arms wide, ready for an emotional reunion with the silver-haired elf girl. However, the reality turned out to be slightly different from what he had imagined. It's been a long time, Frieren. You're still as small and cute as ever. I'm so. His arms were wide open, but before he could finish, Frieren, who had been crouching on the ground, stood up and slowly raised her hands. Hellfire! A red lotus of flame bloomed in her palm and surged toward him like a tidal wave. The surrounding grass and trees were scorched by the intense heat even before the flames touched them. In the next moment, the blazing fire engulfed Ash, still standing with his arms outstretched. Only. Bang! An invisible repulsive force erupted with tremendous impact, instantly dispersing the approaching flames. What are you doing? Ash, unharmed, remained standing as he had been, but the smile on his face stiffened a little. Frieren, however, became more serious, her expression hardening. Can the current illusion ghost block hellfire? Can it even mimic the abilities of an imaginary person? Illusion ghost. Ash was bewildered by her strange words. Are you serious? A phantom that can only create illusions has no combat power at all. Normally, you'd have destroyed it in one strike. Why do you think? It should have been like that, unless it's a mental attack. It's really me. Shut up. How could a human live this long? Frieren simply couldn't believe that the person standing in front of her was her old friend from 1,000 years ago. After all, it defied all logic. Could it be that I stumbled into some strange trap and woke up to find myself here? You think you were frozen or in stasis? That must be it. Are you lying to me? Without thinking, Ash slapped his palm in agreement, nodding vigorously, but Frieren only narrowed her eyes. The magic power in her hands gathered again. This was far from the touching reunion he had envisioned, and it was driving Ash a little crazy. Why? Can't you trust me for just a moment? Prove it. Prove it? How about this? Emperor's wine tastes awful, right? Only a few of us should know that. The illusions from mental attacks could use my own memories to tell you things I don't know. No, seriously? Do you even hear yourself? What's the point of telling you something you don't know? Want me to say that I was the one who spanked you when you were bitten by that treasure chest monster? Would you believe that? Go to hell. Her voice turned colder than ever. In an instant, the peaceful forest exploded with a brilliant light. Boom! The entire forest seemed to tremble with the force of the blast. In the blink of an eye, huge smoke covered half of the forest under the overly powerful saturation magic bombardment. Suddenly, a magical bombardment like a war broke out in the forest, causing the fortress at the foot of the mountain to enter a state of emergency at the first moment. However, as the smoke gradually dissipated with the breeze, the land was ravaged beyond recognition right in front of the two people. Ash was still standing there, not even his clothes were wet, but his expression was just like that of Frieren when she first saw him, so weird that it was hard to describe. What are you doing, Frieren? If it weren't for me, you'd be dead. You are still alive. Frieren seemed unusually cold, and the look in her eyes when she glanced at him seemed to ask, why are you okay like this? This gave Ash an inexplicable stomachache. Maybe I could have been hurt. There's a church at the foot of the mountain. The priest will be able to treat you right away. Frieren pointed casually at the fortress at the foot of the mountain, which had evolved from a village over thousands of years. She still looked like she was sneering at it. After all, I was attacking the surroundings more. Normally, you should be able to defend yourself, and at most you'll be covered in dirt. It would be better if you couldn't defend yourself. No, wait a minute. You already understand that I am me, right? Yeah. And you attacked me anyway. Is there any problem? The girl asked calmly, tilting her head as if this was perfectly reasonable. I. He opened his mouth, wanting to scold her, but he couldn't find the words. He put one hand on his forehead and started worrying about himself instead. But it was at this time that Frieren finally smiled. But, I'm still very happy to see you again. To be honest. What's wrong? Shouldn't you say something now? No, my mind is a little confused. Let me sort it out first. His well-conceived plan was completely disrupted. Frieren's erratic mood swings and actions had left him squatting on the ground, trying to make sense of everything from just now to the present. But Frieren obviously didn't think about it that much. She just smiled and opened her arms like he had before. Don't think too much, come here. Hey, what? A touching reunion hug. If I remember correctly, you said something similar before, right? You seem to be looking forward to it, just now. Although that's true, although it is like that, but... What else are you dissatisfied with? Come here and finish this quickly. My arms are getting sore from holding them up. Oh, okay, I'll be right there. Under Frieren's sudden and somewhat impatient urging, Ash, remembering his original plan, walked forward. While wondering how she had such a good memory, he squatted down and hugged the girl with outstretched arms. He didn't even have time to express his feelings as he felt the softness and delicate touch that hadn't changed at all after thousands of years before Frieren began to pat his head. Hey? What? I don't know, but humans seem to like doing this, so I tried it. Are you happy? To be honest, I can't be happy at all. This is totally different from what I expected. What? It's been 1,000 years, and you're still so willful. Compared to the dumbfounded Ash, it was Frieren who became dissatisfied first. But just like Ash, she also had too many things she wanted to complain about. Chapter 37. After meeting again after 1,000 years, Ash was actually quite touched at first. At least when he first saw his long-lost friend, he genuinely wanted to hug her, but, the subsequent events were completely beyond his expectations. Now, as Frieren patted his head doing something that was clearly meant for an elder to a younger person, Ash instinctively complained. He then placed his hands on Frieren's shoulders, pushed her away gently, and said seriously. Wait a minute, Frieren, isn't there something wrong with this process now? Process? What process? Frieren looked confused. I'm the elder. Besides, a normal person would hesitate when faced with a phantom ghost illusion, right? Why did you seem to have no hesitation at all? If you hesitate as a magician, you could die if you are not careful, right? Compared to his indignation, Frieren's response was matter of fact. But I'm a magician too. If I'd reacted just a bit slower, I could have died as well. It's fine. You're not someone who'll die so easily. What kind of logic is that? The strange trust left him momentarily speechless, unsure of where to even begin complaining. There were so many things he wanted to bring up, but then Ash suddenly thought of something and asked. Wait a second, you're phantom ghost, it was me. Sometimes it's the teacher, sometimes it's you. How do I put it? Even though I haven't known you for long, I still remember you quite clearly. As she spoke, Frieren's expression was more one of awkward entanglement than the girlish sentiment Ash had imagined. Her expression was very subtle. At the end, Frieren looked him over and added, also, I've gotten tired of hearing you and the master beg for mercy. It's quite refreshing that you haven't begged properly this time. What kind of image do you even have of me? Ash, who had intended to tease her, now felt a bit hurt himself. After holding his stomach to ease the blow, he sighed and decided to change the subject. We've known each other for over 10 years now. If we include Flam, it's been several decades. That's quite a long time no matter how you look at it, don't you think? It's only been that long. Okay, I give up on trying to argue about this. Really? But now that you've asked all your questions, is it my turn? You? No, I haven't finished yet. Just bear with it for now, and squat down. Frieren rolled up her sleeves and motioned for Ash to squat in front of her, which instantly made him wary. What? Are you going to hit me? That's right. You're too tall, so it's inconvenient to hit your face. Could you please squat down first? Of course not. What are you thinking? How could anyone agree to such a request? These inexplicably polite yet impolite words made him instinctively retreat 3 meters. But Frieren, expressionless, simply replied, think about it carefully. Isn't this perfectly reasonable? Where is it reasonable? Because you asked. You disappeared without a trace. Master and I both thought you were dead. Master even regretted not being able to find you. And I didn't get a decent night's sleep for the first half-century after you vanished. A few punches are hardly too much to ask for all that, right? That's what Serie said. As she said this, Frieren, who had been walking closer, stopped in front of him and looked up. But before I actually do anything, I'd like to hear your explanation. It was just force majeure, he muttered, looking away in embarrassment, unable to fully explain the truth. What exactly happened? I was near the imperial capital, probably caught in a magic trap, and got frozen. By the way, I only woke up about a month ago. A month ago? Frieren narrowed her eyes, observing the subtle fluctuations of magic around his body. Ash's technique for concealing his presence was highly refined, but she could still easily see through the layers of his disguise. Most people wouldn't recall events from 1,000 years ago, but for someone like her, with a long lifespan, those memories remained vivid. In the past, Ash had been at the peak of mortal strength, but now he had surpassed the limits of a normal human lifespan. In fact, even demons would need centuries of rigorous training to amass the kind of power he now possessed. Judging by his previous rate of growth, it should have taken him about 40 to 50 years to reach this level. Although his appearance hadn't changed, it was clear he had aged. He was likely in his 70s by now. Having made a rough estimate, and considering her own knowledge of human lifespans, Frieren realized that the old friend before her was nearing the end of his life. Why would you lie like this? Why hide your age? So I wouldn't worry? Do you think I can't see through your disguise? These thoughts brought a wave of sadness to Frieren's heart. Her fists, which she had unconsciously clenched, loosened as her desire to strike him for both her master and herself faded. Meanwhile, Ash, who had deliberately given a ridiculous number, was fully prepared to be hit. He squatted on the ground, bracing himself. But as soon as he did, he noticed the lonely smile on Frieren's face. This unexpected expression made him uneasy. What's wrong? On second thought, it wasn't really your fault. And, honestly, I'm just happy to see you again, Frieren said softly, with a tenderness she had never shown him before. She smiled gently and stroked his head once more. But her sudden change in demeanor was so abnormal that it made Ash, who had been bracing for a punch, feel entirely uncomfortable. Instead of goosebumps, suspicion crept in, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she was up to something. Chapter 38. Although Frieren still seemed a bit slow when it came to understanding human emotions, there were still many things she didn't fully grasp. But when she touched Ash's head, she could clearly see the wary expression on his face. It reminded her of their days studying together. She smiled, a hint of nostalgia in her expression, and shook her head. What are you thinking? Aren't we friends? How could I really do anything to hurt you? This girl. When did she learn to say such sappy things? Just moments ago, she was hurling insults at me. Now she's saying this? Where does she get the nerve? Did she learn this from me? Just thinking this, Ash felt something was off. Even he couldn't lie that boldly. This made him start to wonder if Frieren was sick. He couldn't help but place his hand on her forehead. What are you doing? Frieren was speechless. You don't seem to have a fever. Did you eat something strange this morning? Or were you cursed? Do you want to go to the church? This is really troublesome. Maybe I should just punch this guy? Seeing Ash's worried face, Frieren, who had just considered being gentle with him, clenched her fist again. But after a deep sigh, she barely suppressed her displeasure and forced a smile. By the way, how did you even know I was here? Changing the subject all of a sudden. You don't really want me to punch you, do you? Of course not. He didn't particularly want to get punched, he just thought he could take it. But if he were to get hit just for the sake of it, that wouldn't be right either, so he quickly shook his head. Under Frieren's curious gaze, he hesitated before saying, You might not believe me, but I didn't even know you were here before I arrived. No. I believe you. It's impossible. He's probably just trying to hide how long he's been searching for me. Ah, he sometimes has this side to him. Frieren's eyes grew inexplicably gentle. Is that true? Of course. Aren't you my elder? That's the first time you've ever called me your elder, but please stop. I'm not used to it. All right, all right. What do you want to eat? My treat. It doesn't matter. I'll eat whatever you're having. 1,000 years had passed. Even the most stubborn elves change. Could it be that Frieren had grown gentle too? With this thought, Ash followed the silver-haired elf, feeling a twinge of regret for the time that had passed. He figured he'd hang around for a while, enjoying some food and drink. In contrast to Ash, who had been living a luxurious life with two extraordinary figures, Frieren seemed like a true ascetic. Behind the mountain, she lived in a small wooden house she had built herself. The cabin's frame was built from thick logs, with the surface covered in mottled moss and the visible marks of time. The interior walls were just as rustic, maintaining the natural appearance of the wood. Upon stepping inside, a fresh, slightly woody scent greeted him. Though the space inside wasn't large, everything was arranged neatly, and each piece of furniture reflected simplicity and practicality. On the wooden table, which had been cut and polished from a single log, there were candles and an abundance of books. Not far away, the dining table also made of wood held several clay bowls and plates, some filled with wild fruits picked from the forest. In the corner, a wooden bed covered with soft animal skins sat quietly. Next to the bed, a simple wooden cabinet contained a few basic clothes and daily necessities. You're obviously quite powerful. Why live such a primitive life? Ash asked as he surveyed the room. Picking up a grape-like wild fruit from the table, he tossed it into his mouth. The moment he bit down, his face twisted in disgust. So sour. Disgusting. You need to mix it with other wild fruits. Besides, I'm not interested in wealth, Frieren replied calmly. But wouldn't it be better to live more comfortably? Ash countered. Speaking of which, Frieren said as she crouched by the stove, lighting a fire, you're human, so by now, shouldn't you be married? I'd like to see your child. Though I also want to have kids, the only normal women I've been around are the emperor's concubines. A wife isn't exactly. Wait, did you really go in there on purpose? No, that was a misunderstanding. Ash quickly defended himself, feeling the need to clarify his preferences. Frieren sighed helplessly. All right. The Empire's gone anyway, so it's fine to admit it, right? No, really. I prefer normal, pretty girls. You're getting old, and you still want to go after young women. But men always like beautiful, 20-year-old girls. That's really bad. What? Is there something wrong with that? Or, are you just feeling a bit too old, so? This is your second warning. There won't be a third, Frieren cut him off sternly. A moment ago, she had been joking with him, but as soon as age was brought up, her expression turned serious, and she raised 2 fingers in warning. Ash was dumbfounded once again. No? You still keep count? Of course. That's such a grudge. It's been 1,000 years. Can't we just reset it? No. There won't be a next time. Remember that, she said firmly. Although Frieren had been light-hearted just moments earlier, she wasn't willing to compromise on the issue of age. With a stern face, she made sure he understood the seriousness of it. Seeing her resolve, Ash had no choice but to raise his hands in surrender, conceding to her warning. With that, Frieren's serious expression softened. A small, satisfied smile appeared on her face as she returned to preparing lunch. Despite the slightly awkward exchange, their meal consisted only of wild vegetables, mushrooms, and simple smoked meat. However, during lunch, the two of them chatted and laughed in a way they hadn't in a long time. It was as if the 1,000 years that had passed hadn't caused any real rift between them. In that moment, everything felt as though it had returned to the way it was a millennium ago. Chapter 39. In Frieren's cabin, the two shared a pleasant lunch and spent the afternoon chatting leisurely. Later that evening, they took a stroll through the mountains and forests together. Ash, showing no reservations, ended up sleeping on the floor of the cabin for the night. At dawn the next day, Frieren led him to the vast hills nearby. Among the rolling, endless hills, the land seemed to be covered with a holy veil, with countless white flowers blooming in every direction. As he gazed at the endless sea of flowers, his eyes were drawn to the upright stone tablet in the center, engraved with Flam's name. This sea of flowers, it was created with your magic, wasn't it? Looking at the breathtaking scene before him and then at the familiar name on the tombstone, Ash's gaze naturally fell on the girl beside him. You know, don't you? Master's favorite magic was the one that could create beautiful flower fields, so I often come here to use it. But I remember you weren't interested in this type of magic before. That's true, Frieren nodded slightly. But in the end, when Master was nearing the end, I asked her to teach me this spell. Why? Why? I can't really explain it, Frieren said, staring at the tombstone, her brows furrowing as she struggled to find the words. You just want to learn it, right? Is that so? Ash nodded thoughtfully, then asked, by the way, Frieren, what's your favorite magic? Could you create a magic spell that makes a beautiful flower field? I mean your own magic, not Flam's. That's probably it. That's your favorite? You said you liked magic. Can't I like them all? Frieren's expression turned a little sour at the question, and she even retorted, then what about you, Ash? What kind of magic do you like? It's not that you can't, but, well, for me, it's gravity magic. Why? It's the magic that saved my life back then. If I hadn't known it, my troublesome sister and I wouldn't have made it this far. Come to think of it, you have a younger sister, don't you? At the mention of his sister, Frieren's face darkened slightly. Ash, can I ask you something? Sure, what is it? How did you feel when you found out your sister had died? Even now, Frieren couldn't quite grasp the emotions she felt when she cried 1,000 years ago, so she unconsciously looked to him for answers. How do you feel when your sister dies? Ash's expression became complicated. Now that he knew Aura was still alive and thriving, it was difficult to answer. Frieren, sensing his hesitation, quickly grew remorseful. I'm sorry. Let's just forget about it. You and your sister have been through so much together. You must be really close, right? Yeah. I suppose. Suppose. Don't worry about it. Ash tilted his head slightly, gazing at the sky at a 45-degree angle, hoping to hide his awkward, conflicted expression. At this moment, Frieren showed unexpected understanding. She simply patted Ash's shoulder without saying a word. After a long silence, Ash broke the quiet with a sudden thought. Speaking of which, What is it? There are all these strange magic books on your desk. They're not from Flam, are they? I've collected them over the years during my spare time. Frieren's face lit up with a smile as she recalled something amusing. 200 years ago, I found a treasure chest, and when I opened it, I thought it was a mimic monster. But guess what? It actually contained a magic book. Seriously? Isn't that like a 1% chance? Exactly. Frieren's long ears twitched proudly as she tilted her head. Ash couldn't help but laugh at her pride. So, what kind of magic did you find? A spell that makes your body smell nice. Is that useful or not? The fragrance differs depending on the person. Well, I suppose if you get dirty, it could come in handy as a quick fix, right? And since it's unique to each person, that does sound interesting. He stroked his chin thoughtfully before giving a vague nod. Frieren's smile grew wider. Really? You know, you can actually find magic that you genuinely enjoy. It doesn't have to be combat related. The important thing is that it's fun and something you like. Magic I like. I understand ordinary preferences, but the specific ones always seem a little hard to grasp. It's fine. If you want to find it, you will. Looking at his old friend, who still seemed a bit unsure, Ash's eyes softened, and he playfully patted her head. Can I, really? Caught off guard by his affectionate gaze, Frieren stood frozen for a moment. When she regained her composure, she swatted his hand away with a mildly annoyed expression. I thought you had matured, but, don't touch my head like that. You'll mess up my hair. All right. Where? At least my hair isn't a mess. You really haven't changed at all. Though her words were sharp, there was a trace of warmth in Frieren's voice. Despite herself, the corners of her mouth kept curving upward. These small, seemingly insignificant moments brought her unexpected joy. She even found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, she could find the magic she truly liked, just as Ash suggested. Time passed slowly in their peaceful rhythm, and before they knew it, 5 days had gone by. At last, the long-awaited hero of the South appeared on the rugged hilltop. Chapter 40. In the early morning, Ash and Frieren, enjoying a rare moment of relaxation, spent time learning to identify edible wild vegetables among the bushes. Frieren, who had never questioned why he was here at this time, suddenly seemed to have a thought. She looked up at him and asked, Ash, this might be a bit sudden, but, are you afraid of death? That really is sudden, Ash replied, caught off guard. Her expression, however, was particularly serious. If there's something you want to do, tell me. What's going on? Please don't start throwing weird flags like that. I haven't even set foot on the battlefield yet. Really? Well, when you think of something, let me know. Anything is fine. I suddenly wondered. You thought of something? No. I was just wondering if I could get mad and hit you right now. With that, Ash playfully smacked her on the head. Ow! Taken by surprise, Frieren covered her head with both hands, crouching on the ground and looking up at him with a dissatisfied expression. Why would you hit me when I didn't even agree? I didn't give you permission. That's a fair question, but if I had asked, would you have agreed? Of course not. Frieren replied without hesitation, causing Ash to grin. Then why would I wait for your answer? Hey? That makes sense. Wait, no. If that's the case, why did you ask? To make me look more democratic. As Frieren sulked, Ash explained his logic, though it probably wouldn't make sense to most people. But then, democratic. She didn't just struggle with his opinion, she barely understood the word itself. It means respecting others. Does a person who respects others hit someone? Not necessarily. Sometimes it's for educational purposes, like right now. He placed his hand on her head, meeting her dull and resentful emerald eyes, and spoke earnestly. I know you care about me, but isn't your approach a bit strange? It's making me feel like I'm about to die or something. I feel sorry. No. You should be fighting back now. This wasn't like before. Frieren seemed almost too gentle, and it made Ash a little uncomfortable. He couldn't quite place what was wrong, but before he could say anything else, he ruffled her hair roughly. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the distance. He glanced over and saw a middle-aged man with long bangs and a beard, carrying 2 swords at his waist. Ash instinctively withdrew his hand. Frieren followed his gaze and, while adjusting her hair, asked in a calm tone, "Is that someone you know?" "Well, it's a little complicated to explain." Ash stood up, watching his long-lost friend approach, his expression a mix of relief and unease. In truth, he had never formally become the man's apprentice. The relationship between them was better described as something between teacher and friend. He had once placed a great deal of trust in the man, but the future Frank spoke of was vastly different from what Schlat had envisioned. It left Ash uncertain, wondering what exactly his friend, or both of them, were planning. "Long time no see, Ash, and Miss Frieren." Frank stopped in front of the two of them, smiling as he looked at Frieren, who had just stood up while still holding Ash's hand. "Did you tell him about me?" Frieren looked at Ash curiously, but he shook his head. "No, I probably didn't mention it." "So. Miss Frieren, can we speak alone?" Before Frieren could say anything, Frank suddenly interrupted their conversation. Seeing no sign of hostility, Frieren agreed without much thought. Ash could only watch from the sidelines, wondering what they had to discuss in private that needed to be kept from him. A fair distance away from Ash, Frieren glanced at him briefly, watching as he observed from afar, before turning back to Frank with a blunt, uninterested expression. "If you have something to say, just say it. I was going to invite you, but you'd refuse anyway, so it's better I don't." "What's that supposed to mean? Is talking to oneself the trend nowadays?" "No, it's just that I've already seen a future where you refuse. Even if I spent time convincing you to join us in defeating the Demon King, the result wouldn't change. After all, it's better not to waste talent." The odd comment made Frieren question if this man was truly Ash's friend, but she was too indifferent to care at this point. "It's all right to tell you since you won't say anything. Actually, I can see the future." "Really? Haha, I don't expect you to believe me." Frank seemed unfazed by her disbelief. He looked into the distance with a smile, continuing as if speaking more to himself. "Despite there being new possibilities in your future, a young hero will come to you soon, and he will be the one to save the world. I really can't accept that. Is it that hard for you to let go?" Frieren's expression shifted to one of mild puzzlement as she responded. "If I'm not mistaken, aren't you the hero of the South? The strongest human? And yet you think this person is stronger than you? Capable of defeating the Demon King alone?" "Sorry, that was my mistake. I didn't mean it like that. I accidentally gave all the credit to the team leader. What I should have said is that you will save the world." Frank smiled meaningfully, his tone carrying a curious weight. "Without each of you, it would have been impossible to defeat the Demon King. That was a miracle that can't be replicated. In fact, calling it a miracle wouldn't even be an exaggeration. I don't see that happening. Let alone the Demon King, there are plenty of demons out there who can defeat me. Indeed, your chances of victory are less than 1% with your current strength, but if you go, the odds are 100%. No matter how much the Demon King and Schlat alter their strategies, the result won't change. It's like fate. You say you can see the future, yet you still believe in fate." Frieren's skepticism deepened, her voice more pointed. "We can change many things, but some things remain unchangeable, fate being one of them. It's more absurd and unreasonable than destiny." As Frank spoke, he thought of himself and Schlat, both capable of glimpsing the future, yet ultimately bound by an inevitable miracle they could not alter. His face briefly revealed a mix of bitterness and acceptance. Two emotions, entirely opposite, mingled together. Chapter 41. Frieren, who couldn't see the future, naturally had no idea what Frank, who could, was sighing about. To her, his words sounded cryptic and difficult to grasp, like the ramblings of a charlatan trying too hard to be mysterious. Frank could easily sense her unspoken thoughts, but he didn't mind and continued speaking to himself. "Anyway, can you please deliver a message when you meet that young man?" "What message?" "Tell him, the strongest hero of the South, I will personally pave the way for you, even if my deeds are buried in the haze of history." "Is that all?" "Yes, that's enough." "But does this mean, you're going to die?" Frieren nodded casually, but realized something unsettling in his words. Frank remained composed as he replied, "Yes, I will die during the expedition. Specifically, it will happen a year from now. I'll be ambushed and killed on the northern plateau by the all-knowing Schlat and the elite demons under the Demon King's command. You won't try to avoid it. If I don't go, you'll be destroyed by Schlat before you get the chance. You don't seem too scared? Why? You're saying you'll die, right? There's still a year left. If I start worrying now, what good will that do for the future? Frank shrugged, seemingly unfazed. Is that so? By the way, could you keep this future a secret from Ash? You can count on him, but why? His situation is complicated. If he could, Frank would work with Schlat to usher in a new Demon King and bring an end to the chaos. But even with the ability to see the future, there were still far too many factors beyond their control. In the end, there were many things Frieren still didn't understand, but she decided to help keep the secret. After all, there was no point in revealing anything when she wasn't sure if his words were true or false. Later, Frank had a brief chat with Ash and shared part of his plan. Don't worry about the Demon King for now. Focus on getting stronger. After all, if you want the demon's support, you need to be stronger than all of them. You mean I'll have to defeat the Demon King? The Demon King is powerful, but nothing in the world is ever 100% certain. And nothing is ever 0% either. When the future is in sight, what's the real difference between 1% and 100%? Frank smiled proudly, giving Ash a firm pat on the shoulder. Without looking back, he turned and began walking toward the cliff. The next time we meet will be a year from now. But trust me, my friend, the path ahead of you will definitely be cleared. Will it really be cleared? At first, it seemed like an ordinary statement, but after thinking about it, Ash couldn't help but feel something was missing, like who would be the one to open the way? Would it be Frank, Schlat, or someone else? Before he could ask, Frank laughed and leaped off the cliff, vanishing without a trace. After Frank's departure, Frieren stepped up beside him, staring at the spot where Frank had disappeared. With a sigh, she remarked. As expected of your friend, he's even stranger than you are. I don't think I'm that strange, but... Frieren, I'm afraid I'll have to say goodbye soon. Goodbye. I'm happy to see you safe, but there's someone else I need to check on. It's almost time for me to go. Is that so? Frieren didn't pry any further. She simply nodded, though a hint of regret flickered in her eyes. You still seem a bit cold. Wouldn't it be troublesome to be overly affectionate with you? That's fair. He laughed and nodded, not taking her remark seriously. This made Frieren chuckle as well. From the beginning, you've always been a bit weird. I really don't think so, but let's catch up later. Once I finish my business, I'll definitely come back and visit. As he spoke, he playfully ruffled Frieren's silver hair, causing her to glare at him in annoyance. With a grin, Ash turned and walked away, in the opposite direction from Frank. Frieren remained, watching him leave. A quiet loneliness crept into her voice as she whispered to herself. Really, will there be a next time? Her soft murmur received no answer, carried away on the mountain breeze as it disappeared into the sky. 3 months later, in the northern countries. Deep within an ancient forest, a castle stood silently amidst the wilderness. The dry northern monsoon howled as Ash approached, making him sigh at the region's harsh environment. Nonetheless, he quickly arrived at the castle's gate. This area belonged to the demons, yet he strode boldly through their territory, flaunting his power and his identity as a demon. His powerful aura allowed him to approach the castle almost without resistance. But right before the gate, a large group of demons and headless soldiers stood at the ready, prepared for battle. It wasn't unusual. After all, demons often fought among themselves, and vigilance was necessary when faced with unfamiliar, high-ranking demons. Just then, the castle's gate opened. A small girl with 2 horns, a delicate face, and twin ponytails aura emerged slowly, flanked by her subordinates. Upon spotting the familiar figure, Aura's lips curled into a wide, exaggerated grin. Well, if it isn't my adorable jerk of a brother, Ash. Ha, ha ha. This girl's so rude. I really want to knock her out. But wasn't I the one who taught her to act this way? What should I do? Though he hadn't expected a touching reunion with Aura, the moment she opened her mouth, Ash nearly stumbled in disbelief. Chapter 42. Aura's words almost made Ash fall to the ground, and even her men began to doubt their ears when they heard them. After all, they could understand the words adorable, jerk, and brother individually, but when put together, not only was it hard to comprehend, even a human would find it difficult to make sense of. However, Aura didn't care about her subordinates' confusion at all. She simply smiled and looked Ash up and down. I really didn't expect you to still be alive, Ash. I didn't expect you to be alive either, Aura. Feeling slightly annoyed and unsure of what to say, Ash opened his arms. Anyway, how about a touching reunion hug? Is that even possible? Really? Haha, what's wrong? You look so surprised, it's hilarious. As Ash stood there dumbfounded, Aura just stepped out of the crowd and slowly approached him. Despite 5 centuries having passed a full 500 years, Aura looked unchanged from how she was in the past. She still had the height of a lowly, the bust of a mature woman, and the face of a young girl. Yet, her smile was laced with mischief, clearly signaling bad intentions. The fact that she, of all people, was the one to agree left Ash completely helpless. Meanwhile, Aura relished in his astonishment. She smiled naturally and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her chest against his abdomen with an unusual softness. Raising her head, she looked up at him teasingly. What's wrong, Ash? Weren't you the one who suggested a touching reunion hug? Why aren't you hugging me back? That's true, but Aura. After being reminded, he looked down at the girl in his arms with a puzzled expression. What are you thinking about right now? Your expression is really interesting. Touched, maybe? After all, this is supposed to be a touching reunion hug, right? Indeed, I'm so moved my body is shaking. Based on what I know about you, there's no way you're thinking of anything good. That's a bit much. Aura raised the corners of her mouth, her smile deepening. I fulfilled your wish, so shouldn't you fulfill mine? You make a good point, but I refuse. Alarm bells ringing in his head, Ash instinctively slapped her lightly and pushed the mischievous girl away without a second thought. But Aura wasn't upset. Instead, she covered her mouth with her hands, laughing quietly. Even after all these years, you still don't know how to be gentle with women, or, are you just pretending to resist while secretly wanting? I thought you might have changed after all this time, but I didn't expect. Facing this kid he had essentially raised, who was now speaking like a brat, Ash felt conflicted. He even sighed deeply. What on earth have you learned over these years? What are you talking about? Aren't you my mentor? Aura smiled and shook her head. And I still remember that time, one deep winter night, after I washed my feet in cold water, you wanted to warm my toes with your mouth and lick them clean. The look in your eyes was full of longing. No, please don't create memories that never happened, okay? I'm not a masochist. Isn't that something you wanted me to do? Is that so? It really didn't happen. Aura narrowed her eyes slightly. I'm a decent person, I would never do something like that. No, I remember you told me. Told you what? Nothing is impossible. And even if the memories don't exist, it doesn't matter. We can just create them. As the conversation ended, Aura, who had already retreated without anyone noticing, suddenly flipped her palm. Purple energy gathered instantly, transforming into a golden scale. Obey the demon. Strike first. Before Aura could use the scale and cast the obedience spell, Ash had already rushed forward and was in front of her in an instant. His movement was nothing like a magician's. Before Aura could process how fast he was, he swung his hand violently. With a loud bang, the metal scale was shattered by his palm. Aura stood there in a daze, unable to react for a long time. After a moment, she raised her hand in astonishment, staring at her long-lost brother. Have you given up gravity magic? What do you think? Your magic power is almost equal to mine. This doesn't feel like you've given up anything at all. You really understand that the difference isn't that great. How could you dare use this scale to control me in this situation? That's not like you. Haha, this is, of course, based on your previous advice. I set up an emergency mechanism. If I lose, the scale automatically destroys itself. Isn't that a bit of a cheap trick? Thank you for the compliment. I'm honored. Aura, not ashamed but proud, nodded with a playful smile and took a few more steps back. She realized now that the safety distance she had initially left wasn't nearly enough. After all, she never imagined that this guy would actually practice martial arts. However, before she could take 2 more steps, Ash moved toward her with a smile, grabbed her horn, and pulled her over roughly. Don't leave in such a hurry. We haven't seen each other in so long. Shouldn't we catch up? You bastard! It's been so many years, and you still treat me like this. Aura, with her head pulled down and her body awkwardly tilted, gritted her teeth at the familiar treatment, which, even after hundreds of years, still felt fresh in her memory. The demons behind her tensed up once again, the atmosphere charged with danger, as if it could explode at any moment. But, if anyone else had done this, Aura, already proud by nature, would have immediately ordered the undead army and her forces to destroy the offender for such an insult. Yet, when Ash did this, she merely seemed annoyed and dissatisfied. It was far from the point of losing her temper, and surprisingly, she wasn't even particularly angry. However, at the same time, she felt a deep dissatisfaction with herself for tolerating this treatment. She couldn't help but glare fiercely at him from beneath, her expression filled with frustration. Chapter 43. Aura's fierce glare only heightened the tension in the atmosphere. Even though the scene was on the verge of breaking out, making it hard for the surrounding demons to breathe, she still hesitated to give the order to attack, as if this were a family matter to be settled just between them. Of course, the demons' orphans whose parents were still alive had no true concept of home or family, so they simply watched and waited in confusion. Despite the long separation, Ash knew Aura was only showing a bit of mercy while making some trouble for her own amusement. After all, if she'd genuinely wanted to control him, she would have first used her undead army and her subordinates to wear him down and then used her obedience magic. That would have been the safest way to deal with a powerful opponent like him. Furthermore, in the past, whenever Aura used obedience magic, she would always exhaust a wave of enemies first to secure her victory. Not wanting her to embarrass herself in front of others any longer, Ash released her horns, letting her regain her composure. Under her annoyed gaze, he smiled, combed her messy hair with his fingers, and then followed her into the castle. The castle that Aura occupied was once owned by humans, though it was unclear how she had come to possess it. In the audience hall of this ancient castle, hidden deep within mountains and dense forests, the walls were weathered, and cobwebs adorned the ceiling, giving the sense it had been abandoned for a long time. Only the throne Aura sat upon remained pristine, as if to flaunt her power. Of course, before she sat down, Ash noticed a small demon girl in a grey robe, with two small horns, carefully wiping down the already spotless throne. "This really surprises me. You actually adopted a little demon," Ash remarked, sitting on the armrest of the throne while curiously eyeing the girl hiding in the corner. "Ah, Liney. She seemed to have some potential, so I picked her up." Aura glanced at the little girl while biting an apple and casually explained. But after looking at Ash, she seemed to lose her appetite, tossing the half-eaten apple to the floor. Liney darted out, picking up the discarded apple and began eating it right on the spot. Seeing her obvious hunger, Ash couldn't help but ask, "Did you mistreat this child?" "I'm not into that kind of thing." Although her tone was indifferent, Aura still addressed the situation casually. "Liney, don't pick up food from the floor." "Yes, Master Aura." Liney obediently threw the apple away and retreated to her shadowy corner again. Ash gave her a curious look, then remembered his purpose and turned to Aura. "Speaking of which, Aura, why are you here? You're aware of my magic. At first, I always need to gather a few people to help subdue an enemy, don't I? Now that you're one of the seventh sage, would you really still be loyal to someone else?" "Of course not," Aura replied, rolling her eyes. She said that the life or death of the Demon King was not important at all, nor was the survival of the Demon Clan. She was simply here to add her name to the list because the other party seemed strong. That's right, it was just a title, otherwise, she wouldn't be in this deep forest. Although the Seven Sages of Destruction are theoretically an elite group of demons directly under the Demon King, in reality, not even she fit that description perfectly. Even mocked of the Golden Land second only to the Prime Minister and Demon King and regarded as the strongest of the Seven Sages of Destruction is technically part of the elite Demon Clan. But in reality, he doesn't listen to the Demon King at all or participate in the affairs of the Demon King's army. He even told Schlat he has no interest in it. Unless Prime Minister Schlat threatened him with death, Mocked might temporarily compromise. However, it's common for Mock to kill members of the Demon King's army outright. Aura, similarly, has no interest in the Demon King's army or humans. She only wishes to control whoever comes here. But even if they're like this, they remain one of the Seven Sages of Destruction. As for the other demons, Schlat, who works diligently for the Demon King, is really an odd exception. Aura has no interest in the others, but she looked at Ash with curiosity. Come to think of it, Ash, you suddenly disappeared for more than 500 years. But before that, didn't you become a general on the human side? That's true. And then? Where did you go? What? Were you actually worried about me? Realizing that Aura had been keeping tabs on him, he couldn't help but smile and ruffle her hair. This only earned him a cold glare from Aura, and she slapped his hand off her head. Then, with an evil grin, Aura said, I'd like to say no, but if I think about it, maybe it's true. If you died, who would lick my feet? Do we really need to keep discussing this? Isn't that why you came here to see me? Please don't say things even you don't believe. He couldn't understand how she remembered such a thing after all these years and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. Aura looked back at him in confusion. I am serious. And I can't think of any other reason why you would come to me. Are you really serious? Of course. Couldn't it be that you just missed something? Miss you? After all these years? I've had a lot going on too, you know. As the conversation continued, he felt his stomach twist, realizing Aura might actually be serious. So he shifted the conversation, saying bluntly, I'll just be straightforward, I want to become the Demon King, so I need your help. Ah, so that's why you came to me. Aura nodded, mildly surprised, then rested her elbow on the other armrest of the throne, looking up at him with her chin on her hand. My magic would be quite useful with the right preparation. So, does that mean you're agreeing? No. Despite the request coming from her long-lost brother, Aura didn't hesitate in rejecting him outright, not sparing even a moment's thought. After 500 years, she made it clear just how solid their brotherly bond really was. Chapter 44. Aura rejected him instantly, without a trace of hesitation, leaving Ash stunned for a long moment. Placing his hand on his forehead, he thought it over before lowering his gaze. I mean, what's the matter? Aura replied, resting her chin on one hand, her gaze lazy and entirely bored. Even if you're going to refuse, couldn't you be a bit polite about it? You remember everything else I teach you, so how come you forgot the concept of euphemism? That's nonsense. Why should I act like those hypocritical humans? I'm a demon, after all. Right. I distinctly remember mentioning something about kissing feet and all that nonsense. That's the essence. Ah, all right, fine, let's leave it there for now, we'll revisit it later. Her unexpectedly serious and resolute response made Ash's mouth twitch slightly. He took a deep breath, barely holding back his desire to retort. Then, as if exhaling all his frustration, he took a long breath and finally calmed down. Aura, I think you misunderstand. I don't expect you to help me for nothing. Even among siblings, debts should be settled properly, right? Besides, we're not actually related. Don't ruin the mood with that kind of talk right now. Oh? Now you're here, asking for help and trying to talk about feelings? Have you forgotten how you treated me before? Trying to appeal to the rebel kid with love. Sorry, I didn't catch that. Aura's malicious smile deepened. Ash, would you mind repeating that? All right. I admit my faults as the older brother. Please forgive any offense. Just give me another chance, I want to be a good brother this time. You're saying that while sitting on my throne. Aware that Ash needed something from her, Aura looked at him, a slight smirk as she gestured toward the throne's armrest beneath him. Ahem. He cleared his throat, then stood up, smiling softly. Better. Dear idiot, how exactly do you plan on being a good brother? Well. He paused, slightly taken aback, then used his sleeve to wipe the part of the throne he'd just touched. Like this. I didn't ask for a cleaning job, I asked for an apology. I'm sorry. I'll be gentler next time. Next time? No, just kidding. He chuckled as he wiped the already clean surface, then took a step back with a grin. So, Aura, my dear sister, what do you think of my proposal? Terrible. Will you pledge your loyalty to the Demon King? As if. Do you even know who I am? So. Are you out of your mind? That guy the Demon King has ruled for over 1,000 years. He must be at least 2,000 years old, likely dating back to the mythological era. He's a monster among monsters. To someone like him, we who are merely a few hundred years old are nothing more than babies. And you want to challenge him for the throne? Aura's expression turned toward him, concern in her gaze, as though she were on the verge of asking outright, are you an idiot? If you are, don't drag me into your doom. True, technically speaking, but what? I'm preparing for the day the Demon King dies. Are you serious? Is there even anyone who can take down someone like that? Do I look like I'm joking? He met her skeptical gaze with a rare, unwavering seriousness. Aura stared at him for a long time before he suddenly leaned back on the throne, tilted his head, and raised the corner of his mouth, revealing his signature smile. If that's really the case, there's room for negotiation. But before that, shouldn't we first discuss who will be the Demon King and who will be the prince, right? Need I say more? The prince must be you. And why? Because I'm better than you. Haha, we haven't seen each other for 500 years, and while you haven't grown taller, you've certainly grown more arrogant. Aura held her chin in one hand, crossed her legs in high spirits, and her smile immediately mixed with a spark of competitive spirit. Other matters can be discussed, but on this, well, it's the same as always, it should be decided by force. Any objections? I have no objection. Whoever wins will be supported unconditionally. I'll even let you gather the undead army, so don't complain if you lose. How about that? Of course. But before that, I have one question. What if I end up destroying too many of your undead troops? You won't be asking me for compensation, will you? If you think you can, then go ahead. Today, I'll definitely avenge my past humiliations and make you kneel at my feet. Aura slammed a fist onto the armrest, speaking in a heroic tone filled with determination, resolved to compete with him and return every grievance she had suffered. To prevent Aura from cheating if she lost, Ash naturally chose to let her assemble her troops properly. Standing behind her army at the castle gate, Aura looked at her own leaderless army, already thinking about what she would do first after claiming victory. In the war between the Demon King's army and humans, she had seized opportunities to gather a force of thousands of hand-picked elite soldiers. With such a vast army, her victory seemed certain. She even started to worry that winning might feel too easy, robbing her of the thrill and sense of accomplishment. After all, defeating Ash and becoming the master had been her greatest wish for years. Thinking he'd died had almost become her deepest regret. But Ash seems to have regressed. He used to be more cunning, but now, hey. Aura, still yawning, stopped mid-sentence. As her undead army surged forward, Ash showed no fear in the face of overwhelming numbers. Just as the soldiers' swords were about to reach him, he bent his knees slightly, and with an unnatural shift in gravity, every headless soldier, along with the gravel and sand on the ground within 100 meters, floated into the air, completely immobilized. And then, in the next moment, bang! With a deafening boom, the ground cracked open, dust flying in all directions, as Ash's figure disappeared from the spot and shot up into the clouds in an instant. Chapter 45. Aura had imagined many scenarios of victory. After all, the numbers of the two sides were so different that she couldn't lose no matter how hard she thought about it, but this guy is really cunning. The moment Ash flew into the clouds, her heart sank, and she couldn't help but look around nervously. In this era, the sky belongs to the territory of demons and monsters. Even if there are magicians in the undead army, they cannot fly. Not to mention the ordinary soldiers, even the magician guarding Aura and the few demons were caught off guard. As a gravity manipulator, Ash's flying speed was obviously much faster than that of normal demons. In the blink of an eye, not even a black spot could be seen in the sky. It was the first time they were dealing with this kind of opponent, and they lacked the necessary experience and means. The human wave tactics that Aura had imagined lost their effectiveness right from the start, which made her so angry that her teeth were almost broken. I just can't understand why I fell for his trick again. What do you mean by open-air duel? It allows me to fully utilize the advantages of my troops and admit defeat, but isn't this just utilizing my mobility? Ash! Don't think you can beat me like this. This time, I will definitely win. No matter what. She and her men were watching the sky, gritting their teeth, and casting detection magic to sense the magical fluctuations around them. Ash didn't let her wait too long, and soon she captured the unusual magic, but everyone's eyes saw it. They didn't even need to look up to see a hint of red on the ground. In the afternoon sky, there was an untimely spectacle of fiery clouds. The demon girl adopted by Aura. Liney couldn't help but sigh softly, is this a real meteorite? That's right, the fiercely burning fireball was tilting from the sky like a meteorite, falling towards Aura. The speed was so fast that it was unheard of. It was much faster than when it went to heaven. This made Aura's heart tighten. She raised her hand suddenly and shouted, "Hurry up and stop him for me." There was no response, but the headless magicians around her, one after another, sent colorful lights and entities composed of various elements towards the high-speed meteorite. However, the speed of the meteorite's fall was even faster than their magic speed, even. The abnormal gravity created by the purple lightning around the meteorite causes the flight paths of magic such as wind blades, flame pillars, and ice cones to be distorted and deflected as soon as they enter it, or they are distorted and collapsed like other intangible magic, making it impossible for them to approach the meteorite's body. The magic that was dissipating in the sky was even like fireworks, blooming with brilliant colorful lights, and Aura, who was protected by a large group of undead soldiers holding shields, had not yet seen the result she had been expecting, but first discovered. "Can you still turn?" Not to mention that her own magic was deflected, the meteorite even turned at an extremely high speed and came towards her who was trying to enter the castle, which stunned her on the spot. Aura instinctively gathered magic power in her hands, preparing to strike first. It was a simple attack, gathering magic power and then releasing it. For Aura, who already possessed immense magical power, even this basic strike could create a powerful impact. But as soon as the magic power coalesced, a dazzling light suddenly stole her sight. Boom! With a roar that sounded as if the sky itself was collapsing, the place where Aura stood was instantly swallowed by searing flames and a wall of dust that blotted out the sky. The earth trembled violently, and the towering castle behind her seemed unable to withstand the force, shuddering and groaning under the pressure. The brick and stone road leading to the castle was ripped apart, fracturing into intricate, dense cracks that spread across the ground like a massive spider web. Then, as if given life, the cracks stretched in all directions, pushed outward by the shockwave like waves surging in a stormy sea. Every shattered piece of brick and stone turned into deadly projectiles, scattering indiscriminately and bombarding the surroundings. The shield-bearing soldiers standing in front of Aura were torn apart by the meteorites as easily as if they were made of paper, their bodies flung about like ragdolls. Even the demons nearby, who tried to come to her aid, found themselves helpless against the raging shockwave, flames, and gravel like debris. They were hurled backward, unable to advance under the onslaught. Soldiers positioned farther away couldn't escape the catastrophe either. Many of them toppled over, struggling to keep their footing against the earth-shaking impact. In the midst of this unimaginable collision, Aura, a magician with little close combat ability and whose physical endurance was far inferior to that of a warrior, didn't even feel any pain. By the time she realized what was happening, all she could see was the incoming fireball, and then before she could even disperse her magic power she had already lost consciousness. If Ash hadn't held back, she would have been completely obliterated by the explosion. As the smoke and dust gradually cleared, the demons and undead legions around finally saw their master lying unconscious at Ash's feet, in the massive crater left by the meteorite. This sight immediately caused the undead legion to enter standby mode, while the demons, frozen in shock, instinctively stopped all hostile actions, their voices filled with disbelief. Lord Aura, she was defeated just like that. As expected of Master Aura's elder brother. This is unbelievable. With expressions full of astonishment, the dust-covered demons looked on in a mixture of shock, fear, and awe. Though Ash's abilities gave him a considerable advantage over Aura, the fact that she was defeated so decisively by Ash in just a single confrontation illustrated the immense gap between their strengths. At least for now, none of them could think of any way to intercept the high-speed meteorite that moved through a distorted space governed by abnormal gravity. But even as they faced an adversary they knew they couldn't possibly defeat, they simply stood around in a daze, seemingly unsure of what to do. It wasn't just Ash and Aura who followed the principle of assigning roles based on strength. The demon society itself was fundamentally structured around the strong ruling over the weak. However, these demons were Aura's subordinates, and if they were to submit to him without her explicit orders, it would surely cause trouble later on. Ash, however, showed little interest in them. He ignored the ones who seemed like they wanted to speak but hesitated, and just like in the past, he reached out, grabbed Aura by her horn, and hoisted her unconscious form over his shoulder. Without a care, he turned and strode back toward the castle. But now, he was already looking forward to seeing what kind of expression Aura would have when she finally woke up. Chapter 46. The day after the duel. It wasn't until evening that Aura's consciousness gradually returned. She blinked, staring blankly at the familiar ceiling as her mind slowly cleared. It took a while for her to fully understand her situation and to remember her defeat. Why did it have to be like this? I'm sorry, but my magic is just too good against your human wave tactics, came a familiar voice beside the bed. Despicable villain. Aura's head turned instantly, and she glared at him, her face a mix of anger, humiliation, and frustration. Even though she realized that if they fought again, she'd likely lose in the same way, the chance to curse him still brought some comfort. Yet, she couldn't shake her disappointment. After waiting 500 years for another duel, she had expected an overwhelming victory. And while it was overwhelming, the one who was overwhelmed had been her. Honestly, if she weren't so concerned about her pride, she might have burst into tears right then over such a crushing defeat. But as much as she tried not to cry, her frustration showed as she bit down on the quilt, her eyes locked onto Ash with a fierce gaze. The torn quilt served as a stand-in for him, her silent, biting protest. This display brought considerable unease to Ash. Worried she might actually lash out, he backed away a little, then sighed, shaking his head. Are you a sore loser? Hasn't anyone taught you to accept defeat gracefully? You despicable villain. All right, I'm despicable. She continued to glare at him, growling through clenched teeth, but Ash merely shrugged nonchalantly. Say what you want, but don't forget what you promised. What do you want? Although resentment was clear on her face, she knew the difference in power between them. After a long pause, she reluctantly chose the same compromise she had been forced to accept 500 years ago. Yet, she still made sure to warn him, let me make this clear. If you plan to torment me like last time, I'm not going to sit back and let you do as you please. Who do you take me for? A despicable person. Isn't that enough? Wasn't it a fair fight? How is that despicable? He replied casually. Then, to preempt any argument, he gave her a quick, gentle slap on the forehead to silence her. Rather than arguing, just come with me. Ugh, there's more. Aura muttered, pulling his hand away. She sighed, lying on her side. I didn't say this earlier, but it's better to bring it up now. What is it? While I want to become the Demon King, it's not just the Demon King who's a problem. There's also the omniscient Schlat and the Golden Lands mocked. They're both huge threats. Even if we join forces, we might not be able to defeat them. Do you truly think we have a chance? Let's put Schlat aside for now. As for mocked of the Golden Land, he probably has no interest in this. Really? But even so, there are still plenty of other troublesome foes out there. Let's not worry about that for now. Either way, we need to make the necessary preparations before anything happens. The demons may not be numerous, but they wield considerable hidden power. From time to time, a great demon appears, and no one truly knows how many powerful demons lie hidden in this world. Those demons are masters of concealment, nearly impossible to locate. Even the devil himself might not know where they are. Furthermore, it would be far more convenient and effective for Aura to gain control over high-ranking human officials rather than trying to take command of the great demon clans directly. Leave all your forces here, don't even bring the Undead Legion, and come with me to the Empire. The Empire? Why? In this world, there is only one empire, and it stands as the strongest among the northern nations, in fact, the most powerful country in the world. That empire is the last surviving successor of the great civilization that once ruled most of the world 1,000 years ago. Even now, in the face of demon attacks, the empire remains the toughest adversary on the front lines. The empire is troublesome, Aura replied, clearly unimpressed. Honestly, if it weren't for the empire, the central continent would have fallen to us long ago. Don't tell me you want me to control the emperor? Forget it. If that were possible, we'd have done it already. Just thinking about the empire brought a look of distaste to her face. Ash understood her frustration, perhaps even better than she did. Sitting at a desk in the room, he poured himself a glass of water and replied casually, indeed, being surrounded by the empire would be a nightmare. They've inherited far too much from Flam's legacy and have only grown stronger over the past 1,000 years. Flam? Oh, you mean the ancestor of human magic from that book you were reading? Yes. Besides the great demons, the empire itself is our most difficult obstacle. While he hadn't planned to engage the empire directly yet, just thinking about it was enough to give him a headache. Despite only a fragment of the great empire surviving the surrounding nation's siege, it remains the strongest faction, with its heart in the imperial capital, a power that neither demons nor humans can take lightly. Long ago, Flam, with a noble vision, spread magic throughout human society, particularly in the empire, hoping it would become a beacon for humanity. But the reality turned out to be a mix of success and contradiction. The Empire indeed became the backbone of resistance against the demons, but its role as a guiding light for humanity is questionable. For Ash knew that in the future, once the Demon King falls and the demon realm descends into chaos, the Empire, freed from its greatest threat, will turn against them. In doing so, it will secure its place as the dominant magical civilization and the strongest human nation. The Empire venerates Flam, as well as their master Serie and her apprentice, Frieren. Even at that time, Serie had followed Flam's will, teaching magic to humans for over half a century. Frieren had also played a crucial role as one of the heroes in the fight against the Demon King, helping to rid humanity of its greatest threat. Chapter 47. The Empire alone cannot hope to kill the Demon King, nor would they be able to defeat the demons by themselves. On future battlefields, if they want to reclaim their positions in lost territories, they will still need to rely on the heroes of the south to break into the heart of the demons and sever their supplies. Without the support of other human nations and the emergence of a large number of heroes, the Empire would likely have no future. However, when previous threats are no longer threats, those who once helped them naturally become new ones. Even though Frieren and her companions saved humanity in their time, and Serie followed Flam's will by coming forward to teach humans magic, continuing legacy, the fate of those who defeat the demons seems like the death of the hunted rabbit and the grief of the fox, or the bow being put away once the bird is dead. As expected, only those who pass early can retire in honor, those who live too long are bound to encounter unfortunate events. Reflecting on the somber future, Ash couldn't help but feel sympathy for the last two elves in the world, who were destined to be betrayed. In this world, where people both now and in the past seem to use their own as expendable forces, he was not entirely surprised by such a fate. Moreover, the longer one lives, the greater the chance of encountering misfortune. After all, it's unreasonable to expect every generation of emperors to act honorably or remember past contributions made by others. But in truth, this was only part of the reason why Ash wanted to take action against the Empire. Schlat had warned him of the situation that awaited them, but his main reason lay in something he had recently observed while on his way to Aura. He had passed by battlefields where two countries were locked in a fierce struggle. The Empire has always harbored ambitions of restoring its former glory, which has driven its aggressiveness towards other nations. Naturally, this aggressive stance led other countries to hate the Empire deeply, to the point that they wouldn't hesitate to strike from the rear when the Empire faced external threats. From a high vantage point, Ash observed the armies of both sides entangled in fierce combat, their forces so tightly interwoven that they seemed inseparable. All around, arrows and spells crisscrossed the battlefield, creating a grim yet spectacular sight. On the snowy northern continent, he could see the ground littered with frozen limbs and scattered bodies around the main battlefield. What caught his attention even more was the number of young children among the fallen. I never expected this. While fighting us in the front, they're also warring among themselves in the back. Humans are truly fascinating and brutal. Hovering in midair, Aura surveyed the human civil war below, her eyes unconsciously falling on the bodies of young children still clutching weapons, a sight that puzzled her. Turning to Ash, he asked. Ash, if I remember correctly, human children should not have the strength to fight, right? No. Then why are so many children armed? Maybe they're exploiting the fact that few would willingly attack children. Besides, these are war orphans and others being sacrificed for different reasons. It may also help reduce the food strain on their homeland, in a way. I see. I've learned something, Aura nodded, her expression one of sudden realization, though she still couldn't fully grasp why he had brought her to this battlefield. Unable to hold back, she asked, so, what are you planning to do? Because what I hate most is the meaningless waste of life. And now, I want to put an end to it. With his gaze fixed on the center of the battlefield where the two sides clashed, Ash muttered something she couldn't quite understand. After instructing her to stay put and not to move, he launched himself downwards, falling freely toward the ground. His descent quickened, gaining speed with every passing second. At first, no one on the battlefield noticed their presence, but as the sky began to shift in color, soldiers instinctively looked up, and the expressions on their faces froze. Because, a blazing meteorite streaked across the sky, trailing purple lightning, hurtling toward them. Meteorite. It's a meteorite. Shoot it down. Hurry, shoot it down. Quick, run. The already chaotic battlefield erupted into complete pandemonium. Many, terrified by this sudden celestial phenomenon, were too busy screaming and fleeing, creating a scene of complete disorder with no semblance of control or coordination. Any magic cast in an attempt to intercept it distorted and disintegrated, just as had happened with the magic of the undead legion and the demons before. And then, in the next moment, boom! With a thunderous explosion that seemed to tear the very fabric of space, time itself seemed to freeze. The ground at the heart of the battlefield was engulfed by the meteorite's impact, which carried an overwhelming force of destruction. The dust, flames, and lightning merged into a chaotic scene resembling the end of the world. The soldiers at the center of the battlefield looked so small and powerless in the face of this catastrophic event. Their armor and weapons were rendered useless against the impact of this mysterious meteorite, and their bodies were effortlessly torn apart, scattering in bloody arcs like dead leaves caught in an autumn wind, a scene of utter desolation and despair. The firelight illuminated their faces, vividly capturing their expressions of fear and hopelessness. Soldiers knocked down by the shockwave farther away peered through the clearing dust and smoke to finally catch a glimpse of the meteorite's true form, a man clad in a black cloak and mask. Before they could comprehend the situation, several dark purple orbs of light appeared around him. "Killing magic," he declared, slowly raising his hand. Instantly, the orbs transformed into beams of purple light that swept across the remaining soldiers nearby. Whether they were Kingdom or Empire soldiers, the speed of the beams rendered their armor, shields, and bodies as thin as paper. Hundreds of soldiers were effortlessly torn apart by this killing magic, with blood splattering in all directions like blooming flowers, painting the air a vivid red. And across the entire battlefield, no one could withstand the relentless advance of this human-shaped calamity. The battlefield, which had already resembled purgatory, transformed in the blink of an eye into an arena of total annihilation. The screams, wails, and roaring flames combined into a tragic symphony of doomsday. Confronted by this inexplicable force, the armies on both sides, even those attempting to rally from afar, were paralyzed by the sheer might of the intrusion, halting their battle and forced to retreat. Forcing powerless people to fight is unnecessary no matter how one views it. To enforce this belief, Ash had chosen to use this incident as a warning to other nations, to let them understand that there would be consequences for such behavior and that persisting in it would bring nothing but devastation. Chapter 48. After delivering a devastating blow to the Empire's and Kingdom's warring forces, forcing both sides to abandon their conflict and retreat, Ash temporarily halted his assault. But it was only a pause. Walking casually across the battlefield as if taking a stroll, Ash moved towards the high-ranking positions within the Empire's forces. While nervous soldiers continued to retreat, he made his way up to the Imperial commanders. Gathering magic power in his hands, he released a beam of killing magic that swiftly swept through the command tent, completely annihilating the core leadership. Without delay, he turned to the Kingdom's side and did the same. As chaos erupted around him, Ash made his purpose clear to the remaining, scattered troops. After taking down both sides' commanders, he left a trail of disorder behind him, capturing a few key officers. Under Aura's control, these officers provided the information Ash was seeking. With that knowledge, he turned his attention to the nearby estate of an imperial noble. Compressing earth and stone beneath him, he created a massive sphere, towering as large as a castle, and brought it crashing down onto the mansion, leveling it with overwhelming force. Leaving a warning that this was a punishment, Ash took Aura, who was consolidating her magic to maintain the balance of power, and they silently proceeded to another nearby noble's residence for a further test of his control abilities. If the noble's will was too strong, he'd abandon the attempt. Fortunately, they encountered little resistance. As nobles close to the center of power, they had become more attached to a life of luxury than one of defense. With ease, Aura manipulated their minds, allowing Ash to set the initial steps of his plan into motion. Indeed, Ash's actions from his battlefield intervention to these attacks were far from meaningless. His fierce display on the battlefield served as a message, a visible show of strength, while his targeting of nobles would genuinely instill fear in those responsible for conscription. The officers he eliminated were precisely those advocating for child soldiers, making his intent unmistakable. Alongside his aim to eradicate child soldiers and fulfill his agreement with Frank in his own way, Ash used his bold actions to cloak his more subtle movements, quietly planting seeds of influence among humans. After all, his goal wasn't simply to take on the title of Demon King, it was to ultimately control the entire world. But with the Empire presenting particular difficulties, he started by planting a few thorns among its nobles. Thus, he exited imperial territory and shifted his focus towards the kingdom. Although the capital was fortified by a barrier left by Flam, a magical defense that had served as the core protection against demons for millennia, even Ash couldn't entirely comprehend its nature. Not even Frieren fully understood it, but through preserved control methods, they managed to maintain the barrier, allowing people to move in and out as they pleased while relying on internal controls. Through this, Ash, with his powerful yet discreet abilities, infiltrated the barrier undetected, altering it just enough to permit Aura to follow him inside. Though this isn't your first time in a human city, it's your first in a capital with such a barrier. Impressive work, Aura remarked playfully. Inside the carriage, Aura discreetly opened a crack in the door, glancing at the streets around them. Amused, she raised her foot and nudged the man posing as their coachman in front, observing the bustling capital with intrigue. Feeling a surge of impatience, he grasped her ankles and pulled them under his arms, foregoing any further words. He closed my eyes and rested along the way until we arrived at the entrance of the royal city in the heart of the capital. Who goes there? At the city gates, a line of knights clad in heavy armor spotted the strange carriage that approached without pausing. Startled, they drew their weapons. The coachman cast them a single, chilling glance. An invisible force swept over them, stirring up dust and scattering tiles along the ground. In the next instant, the knights were lifted from their feet and flung against the walls like fish tossed by waves. The tightly shut gates of the royal city, reinforced with powerful magic, barely held up before crumbling like paper under the searing glow of purple light, a product of the killing magic. Without acknowledging the guards scrambling to assemble, the carriage continued its steady pace, moving unhurriedly toward the grand castle that served as the royal palace. At any other time, a raid like this might have been impossible. But, relying on the ancient protective barrier as their strongest defense, the kingdom's main forces and elite soldiers were already engaged in battles against demons and the Empire. The kingdom's highest authorities could not have fathomed that the ancient barrier they held in such esteem would be shattered. As a result, only 2 capable defenders remained in the capital, making this the perfect opportunity. Ash was resolute, he wouldn't waste the chance. He was here to dethrone the king and claim the nation as his own, setting the stage for his future ambitions. Royal Palace, Audience Hall. In the midst of an urgent meeting to discuss the troubling reports from the front lines, the doors to the audience hall were suddenly thrown open. A soldier, clad in heavy armor, stumbled forward and fell, then scrambled up to kneel on the floor, shouting in desperation. "Your Majesty! Intruders! There are intruders!" Intruders? What? The king, seated upon his throne, was still in the middle of his response when he saw 2 figures step into the hall. His pupils contracted in shock, and he bellowed, "Guards! Capture these 2!" Before he could finish, Ash raised his hand without a moment's hesitation. Boom! A powerful surge of repulsive force erupted, sending the soldiers who had just surrounded them hurtling backward, their momentum even greater than before. The guards' cries ceased as abruptly as they had started. "Your Majesty!" A nobleman whispered, his face drained of color as he stared at the king, who now shivered visibly, hunched in his throne like a man gripped by an unseen chill. Who are you?" Ash, a youth who appeared no older than 18 and could have passed for either a boy or a young man, exuded an air of ominous authority. In stark contrast, the king, a man well past 70, with a bloated and trembling frame, struggled to suppress his fear, hoping only to buy himself a few more moments. Yet Ash seemed utterly indifferent to his feeble attempts. "You may go in peace," Ash announced. "From this moment on, I shall protect this kingdom in your stead, shielding its people from both the Empire and the demonic threats." His gaze swept over the nobles with an unmistakable air of finality, as if he had no intention of holding further discourse. He gestured toward Aura. As the assembled nobles' eyes fell upon her horns, a collective gasp escaped them. But Aura's gaze held no mercy as she withdrew an ancient scale. Realization dawned upon the crowd, and in an instant, dread took hold. They recognized the scales from legends, a rare and overpowering magic known only in whispers. Desperation clawed at them as they attempted to flee, but it was already too late. "Submit to the magic," Aura commanded, her voice dripping with malice as she delivered the words that made their blood run cold. Everyone in the room froze. Their bodies, unresponsive, were held in place by her spell, and their magic flowed inexorably toward the scale. The weight of the spell drew from them, sealing their fates with an inevitability that could not be denied. The end result was bleak, hopeless, at least for them. _______________________________________________________ Another week and another ranking, so Power Stones would be appreciated. And check out a new book I just uploaded. Name, Code, A Tale of Cynicism and Strategy. Synopsis. After 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from a car accident, Hachiman Hikigaya feels he's missed his chance to fit into his class. But when he receives a recommendation to attend the prestigious Tokyo Advanced Nurturing High School, opening in May, he decides to take a fresh start, encouraged by his sister Komaka to find friends. Soon, he finds himself entangled with a unique group. Kuruzawa-ke, you're my host now, so it's normal for us to be close. Sakayanagi Arisu, you seem troubled by ordinariness. I have a reliable plan for future geniuses. Horikita Suzuan, I tried making a bento yesterday, if you'd like some. Kushida Kikyo, with a dark smile, we know each other's secrets, so it seems we're tied together now. Komaka comments dryly, Unii-chan. I'm not sure this is what having friends looks like. Chapter 49. Under the influence of magic, none of the pampered princes and nobles could muster any resistance. The only exception was the bishop, blessed by the goddess, who fell dead without any warning the moment he was controlled. I really have no choice but to be the hero here, Ash muttered, glancing at the nobles kneeling before him. Thinking of Frieren, who was about to set off on her journey, he sighed, although, I really can't say I envy Frieren and her friends. It wasn't just sour grapes. Frank had once mentioned how their group had met a king who, irritated by their bluntness, had the hero and a dwarf bound and forced to kneel, just a step away from beheading. Despite having the strength to resist, they submitted to the king's authority, as was required of anyone aspiring to be a hero. Heroism meant accepting the laws embodied by kings, and Ash would rather avoid the restrictions that came with that role. Rather than abide by rules, he preferred to make them when he had the power. So, he didn't feel envious, just slightly intrigued by the thought of occasionally playing the role of hero. With that in mind, he resolved to finish things here and go join Frieren and her merry friends for a while. When I was young, I wanted to be a hero too, he murmured, glancing at the kneeling king and letting out a sigh. After all, in a traditional sense, the hero would be the one kneeling before the king, not the other way around, even if he wasn't truly a hero. Aura, playing with the crown beside him, overheard his words and turned, taken aback. For a moment, she observed Ash as though he were a curiosity, and then, hesitating, she couldn't help but ask, Ash, are you really all right in the head? Don't look at me like I'm some kind of fool. No, think about it, she replied, puzzled. We're demons, Ash. We're doing the work of villains. According to that storybook you insisted I read, aren't we the villains destined to be defeated? Please, no need to set weird flags, he groaned, covering his face with one hand. I was only saying that. Everyone wants to be on the side of justice at some point, right? Even you must. No. Aura's response was quick and firm. Yeah, that's what I thought, he sighed, shaking his head. But can we discuss something cheerful for a change? So, what's our next move? She asked without missing a beat. I thought we'd agreed to talk about something fun, not work so soon, he said, exasperated. Faced with her total disregard for a change of topic, Ash couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Accepting his fate. There was no other choice. Although he wanted to relax, Ash knew he still had work to do. Now that he'd gained control over the king and nobles, his plan needed further refinement. Now was definitely not the time to be lazy. When Ash entered the royal city, the defenders quickly assembled to support and protect the king. However, before they could even approach the castle, the king appeared and informed them that the invaders had retreated voluntarily and no reinforcements were needed, so they could depart. The official explanation was that the kingdom had been humiliated and forced to agree to the invaders' conditions, promising not to conscript orphans as cannon fodder. Clearly, it was a nation's reluctant concession to a show of overwhelming power, though the actual situation was slightly different. Inside the castle, amidst the cleanup and repair of the damaged areas at the end of the audience hall, Aura sat on the throne's armrest, just as Ash had done before, watching the nobles kneeling below. She sighed, seemingly puzzled. It's really hard to believe. Many of humanity's generals and heroes are able to put up a little resistance now and then when they're manipulated. But, why couldn't those at the very top, the so-called leaders, offer any resistance? Why do the soldiers on the front lines obey such a weakling? Their social structure is different, Ash replied. I just don't get it. This guy is mediocre, incompetent, and only ever thinks about indulgence. Why don't his subordinates overthrow him? Wouldn't it be simpler to just replace him? Aura glanced at the king kneeling below the throne, who was quietly confessing his situation, her expression full of confusion. In fact, this is a typical aristocracy. When everyone's on equal footing, no one really has the right to laugh at anyone else. Plus, there's the question of legitimacy and the need for support from others. Successfully pulling off a coup isn't as easy as it sounds. Still don't understand. Although she had asked, she quickly lost interest. She paced freely between the thrones, smiling like a child with a new toy. But if Ash keeps this up, ruling over humans and eventually becoming the Demon King is only a matter of time, right? It's not that simple. You just saw the bishop die. It must be the goddess's blessing that makes it impossible to control certain individuals. Concerned she might act impulsively, Ash added, also, the human world has strong faith in the goddess. I expect another bishop will soon come to investigate the cause of death of the previous one. Why not just kill them? If one comes, kill one. If two come, kill both. What's so difficult about that? Killing high-ranking church officials randomly would only cause unrest and destabilize the kingdom. It would be wiser to detain the bishop first and then come up with a plausible excuse to keep him under control. Is Ash really that gentle? While I'm not fond of senseless killing, this isn't about gentleness. Seated on the throne with his chin resting on his hand, Ash let out a deep sigh. Worried she might interfere with his plans, he took a moment to explain some of humanity's more intricate social dynamics and the critical issues involved. After all, if it were really that simple, the Demon King would have already had Aura take action. But Ash still wanted a chance to spend time with Frieren and her companions, so for now, he focused on giving Aura a thorough briefing on the necessary precautions.
Thanks for listening.